Mass Effect is a game series that most people would recognize for its stellar cast of characters, its iconic protagonist in Commander Shepard, and some of the most thought-provoking philosophical questions condensed into mere choices in a video game. But I don't think any of these would be possible without creating one of the most interesting and fleshed-out video game universes, maybe ever. After playing through the original trilogy for the first time in my life, I've developed an appreciation for the living, breathing world that the Mass Effect team created, and let me tell you why the world building of the Mass Effect universe isn't just a work of art. It's a goddamn masterpiece. And I want to start by talking about the game's many races. See, one of my biggest gripes with fantasy races in general is that most of the time they're just humans with extra steps. In many different media, elves are often portrayed as fancy humans with pointy ears. Dwarves and halflings are just humans but shorter. And aliens are usually the same as well. Just look at comic books where a lot of the time aliens just mean human with different colored skin and maybe some superpowers. Gamora from the Guardians of the Galaxy and Coriander, aka Starfire from the Teen Titans are prime examples. And in some cases, the quote-unquote aliens just straight up look like humans without any visual differences. For example, the MCU's Asgardians, DC's Kryptonians, and Invincible's Viltrumites. Note, this is not a criticism of the creators of these alien races. In fact, some of them have some very good in-universe explanations as to why these aliens look like human beings, like in Star Trek The Next Generation. It just makes me appreciate that the Mass Effect team was willing to do something different. Create a universe full of distinct aliens, and committing to making them actually look alien. Take the Krogan, for example. In the Mass Effect universe, they're painted as these giant, crocodilian-looking hulks, even if their faces were actually modeled after bats. They're the galaxy's enforcers because they're strong and durable, and while they stand on two legs and have a humanoid skeleton, they undoubtedly look alien. You would not want to be in a fistfight with a Krogan based on their design alone. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have the Quarians, a nomadic people that were forced out of their own homeworld, that live aboard their ever-growing fleet of spaceships. While they're humanoid as well, we don't actually see what they look like. That's because they wear these exosuits specifically designed to keep bacteria and viruses out. And then you get to the council races. Turians are tall, reptilian/avian creatures that apparently have metal coursing through their veins. Salarians are these slender, curved-chested, bug-eyed beings that feel like an homage to classic aliens of the olden days. And finally, the Asari, a race of telekinetic blue women, which may seem like a copy-paste on the surface, but it's implied that different races perceive them as their definition of attractive. So, while we may see Asari as sexy blue alien women with some weird head shapes, we may just be seeing what they want us to see. And then of course there are the sentient races that aren't humanoid, such as the jellyfish-like Hanar and the hulking behemoths that are the Elcor. And while yeah, most of them do use the humanoid shape of standing on two legs and having two arms, I appreciate how the aliens have much more to them than just humans with pointy ears, or human but green, or human but fun-sized. And this is what initially sold me on the Mass Effect universe. The aliens actually look alien, and not just like humans with extra steps. But it's not just the designs of these aliens that's interesting, but it's how these designs tell a story of their own, about how these alien species came to be. As you already know, humans weren't just created as we are now with our upright spines, opposable thumbs, and ability to walk on two legs. We had to evolve as a species over thousands of years. And one thing I love about the Mass Effect universe is that it understands that the alien races of the game are also a product of evolution, just like human beings. Going back to the Krogan, they have wide-set eyes, like prey animals on Earth, giving them a greater range of vision, and humps on their back, inside which they store water and nutrients, much like camels do. We also know that their big bodies contain an interesting anatomy. Additionally, as a species, they have redundant systems, like an extra heart, extra set of lungs, and even more testicles for males, making them incredibly fertile. The Krogans aren't the galaxy's most tenacious race just because the game developers needed a warlord-type alien race. They're such a dangerous race because they evolved to be survivors, due in large part to the fact that Tachanka, the Krogan homeworld, is full of alien creatures that want to kill you. much like the Australian bushwhack. Thus, the Krogan had to evolve to survive, and that's what makes them such excellent fighters. And then there's the Quarians again. The reason that they have their exosuits is because their ships are a sterile environment, and with each passing generation, their immune systems as an entire species weaken so much that a small puncture in their suits could be fatal due to the exposure to foreign bacteria, viruses, and germs in general. And this is how you create a non-human race and make it believable for a fictional setting. Often we just have aliens or fantasy races that were just created, but other species have evolved the same way we did from our ancestors. And not only does this make the races of Mass Effect feel much more believable, it makes the world itself feel more alive and inviting to the player to learn more about it and explore it. All of Mass Effect's major races have a story to their species, and their creative designs makes just looking at them evoke a sense of curiosity. You don't just go through Mass Effect and not want to learn more about the people on your squad. And I want to take a moment to appreciate how the games present curiosity as a choice. Most of Mass Effect's world building is gated behind dialogue, but it's done in a tasteful way that isn't just forced exposition dumping present in modern games. I'm not saying that the game doesn't exposition dump. It does have its fair share, but it never gets to the point where it's annoying. After all, a lot of dialogue in the games are skippable. And on a personal note, I think games should continue to do this. Not only does it help players on repeat playthroughs get to their favorite moments faster, but it also gives players the option to learn more about the worlds or not. The game respects your time and your intelligence. It knows that it's interesting enough on its own and trusts you, the player, to be curious and want to learn more about it. And that's something I just can't say for modern video game worlds. In fact, some of the best storytelling and lore tidbits in the series are gated behind optional dialogue choices or overhearing NPC conversations. For example, we learn that Quarians are treated as second-class citizens by most of the galactic community. We learn that Solarians only live about 40 human years, and thus time is so much more valuable to them. Or why the Normandy, our ship, is such an important breakthrough in ship design, not just technologically, but culturally as well, as it was a joint human-Turian project. We also learn how the genophage works, and that it doesn't just stop Krogan conception, it creates stillborns, which is much more terrifying and inhumane. Or we learn more about the Mass Effect phenomenon, which is the franchise's own namesake, and how, as a space magic system, it's actually pretty well written and explained in-game, and answers the question on how things like space telekinesis and FTL travel make sense. By going through extra dialogue and entries in the Codex, which is voiced, by the way, that extra level of effort is very much appreciated, your experience of playing through Mass Effect, at least the original trilogy, is enhanced so much further. And the more you understand about the universe, the more you appreciate the events that occur in the games and the relationships that you build with the alien characters. For example, Tali taking off her mask should you choose to romance her is a moment that has a ton of gravity when you know about Quarian and their history and physiology. And your friendship with Garrus means a lot more when you keep in mind that Turians and humans were at war at some point. It's moments and relationships like these that wouldn't matter as much as they do if the world building wasn't so well established. And that is the mark of a really good fucking world. And perhaps the most interesting thing that Mass Effect does is that it gives humanity an identity. When you think about a fantasy world, say the Forgotten Realms, Dungeons and Dragons, humans are always boring. Why would you choose to play a human in a world where you can play a fire-breathing dragon person, or a human-orc hybrid, or a fiendish humanoid? And usually it's something about how humans propagate fast, or are adaptable, or are unbending in their spirit. It's the same old song and dance most of the time. And with so many interesting races and worlds in the Mass Effect universe, where does humanity fit in? After all, in the games, they're presented as the newest player in the galactic community. We're kinda late to the interstellar party, and as a result, we don't have much of a reputation in the eyes of other races, aside from being a big variable. After all, the greatest minds in human history have always asserted the idea that human beings are the highest form of life, due to our capacity for rational thought. We have culture, beliefs, ideals, and wants. We have souls, and ponder what happens to them when we die. But when you introduce other sapient beings to our universe, ones that can manipulate the laws of physics, that can seemingly revive themselves after being killed, have photographic memory as a whole species, or are just straight up smart, you take that power away and then you ask the question, what then makes humanity so special? And we see it quite plainly in the original trilogy. It's humanity's potential to be different. One of the running themes in Mass Effect is that humanity is unpredictable, not just in our behavior, but in our genetic diversity. It's part of the reason why so many races in the game are so hesitant to trust us, because we, as a people, are so difficult to predict. Throughout the games, all the other races feel homogenous. In fact, there's a conversation that you have with Mordin in Mass Effect 2, where he tells you that human beings are perhaps the most interesting race in terms of genetic diversity, as other races don't experience the same variants. Every Asari we meet is blue and biotic, at least under normal circumstances. Every Salarian we meet is smart, every Krogan we meet bloodthirsty, etc. In the Mass Effect universe, your species defines who you are, at least for the most part. While some individual members of other races do go against the grain and act differently from what their people would normally. Garrus, for example, acts rebelliously, criticizing bureaucracy, and thinks much differently from his Turian brethren. Humans are incredibly hard to qualify because the experiences and beliefs of one individual may vary wildly from the next. And there's a very subtle detail in the gameplay of Mass Effect that illustrates this. In the original trilogy, each alien squad mate is the only representative of their race. Tali is the only Quarian, Garrus the only Turian, Mordin the only Salarian, Thane the only Drell, you get the point. Sure, there's Rex and Grunt and Samara and Liara, but for the most part, you can only choose one at a time depending on the game. But each game also makes it a point to have multiple humans available too. Kaidan and Ashley in Mass Effect 1, Miranda, Jack, and Jacob, and if you're counting DLC characters Kasumi and Zaid in Mass Effect 2, and James and your choice of either Cait or Ash in Mass Effect 3. And I believe that this is just a subtle way of the game developers showing us that there's a greater variance between human and human than there would be for other alien races within the universe. And that's true. We have different skin colors and overall appearances. Then there's also things like naming conventions, religious beliefs, and even sexual preferences. It's in this variation that makes humanity not just interesting to other races, but also a pivotal factor in the war against the Reapers. And that's because humans can't be predicted. We don't have a collective fatal flaw, and it's ultimately a human being that brings about the downfall of the Reapers because they had them counted out. And I think that's beautiful. Humans have a place in the galaxy as the X Factor, the unknown variable that could change the outcome of an entire war, and I think that's such a fitting theme for a game that's all about the choices you make, and it's why the story of the original trilogy can only work with a human protagonist. And this is only further compounded when you know more about the universe, because we know what happens when the other races try to make a difference. The Quarians tried to kill the Geth, a race of sentient AI that they had created. The Salarians advanced Krogan technology too early and meddled with their evolution as a species. As a result, they almost wiped out half the galaxy, and they also created the Genophage, an inhumane bioweapon that nearly results in the extinction of an entire species that they meddled with. And when the council that's ignored you for the whole game gets attacked by a Reaper, who is ready to jump at a moment's notice to save them? Humanity's variance makes the race so much more interesting, because we can do things that were thought to be impossible. Which leads me to my last thought. Truth be told, you don't need to make an interesting world to make a fun video game. You don't need incredibly fleshed out alien races, thousands of years worth of lore, and a fleshed out space magic system to tell an amazing story. But good world building can only improve the story that you're trying to tell, and since Mass Effect is a game that is ultimately about your choices, having this insanely fleshed out world only enhances every decision you make. It's the world building that gives Mass Effect's choices so much gravity. Is it worth taking a risk and giving an alien race that nearly conquered the galaxy a saving grace from extinction and a second chance at life? Do you brainwash an entire faction of enemies and preserve their lives, or do you kill them and respect their right to free will? Do you reverse the effects of one of the most horrible bioweapons to have ever been conceived in a video game, but in doing so potentially start another war should those victims seek out revenge? Like I said, Mass Effect is a series that is ultimately about the choices you make. But for this premise to work, you need to give the player a reason to care about the world that the game is set in. And Mass Effect does just that with its thousands of years of lore, with its rich dialogue and political intrigue and philosophical questions, and some of the best side characters in video game history. And that's why the Mass Effect universe is a world-building masterpiece. And if you liked the video, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and let me know your thoughts down below. That's all for now, and Ace out.